Well, wait and see was hardly what the newspapers wanted to do after the monthly nationwide Building Society survey showed house prices fell by 0.8% in November compared with October. It was the second survey that month to show a fall, and it was the biggest drop since 1995, cutting the price of the average home by £2,000 in just a month. Well, that came as no surprise to Jonathan Davis, a chartered financial planner and spokesman for housepricecrash.co.uk, a website that has been predicting just that. I asked him why.
We had easy lending. We now have a credit crunch. We had very low interest rates. Now mortgage rates are more like 6%, irrespective of what the Bank of England does. We had a mania in buy-to-let, and we know that those buy-to-letters are now flocking to offload their properties.
And what do you think the effect of that will be?
We will see a fall in average prices over, say, 4 to 6 years by between 30 and 40%. In other words, a £250,000 house, I forecast, will fall to £150,000.
And you say you forecast it. You are way out of line with just about every other forecast, aren't you? Only one other actually agrees house prices are on the way down.
All I can say is they said to us time and time again that there would not be a house price crash in America.
And they were right. They've been right every time.
On the contrary, they said there was not going to be a house price crash in America. The Federal Reserve said it, the big banks said it, the Treasury Secretary said it, and now they have the biggest crash since the Great Depression in the 1930s. And in the UK, we've seen an increase in prices over 10 to 15 years, depending upon what part of the country you're in, of over 200%. I think it's entirely reasonable to expect a fall, and that is simple market alterations.
The difference, of course, between here and America is they now have a housing surplus, whereas here we still don't have a housing surplus.
If you go into any city centre, Leeds, Manchester, Liverpool, etc., you will see literally hundreds of apartments for sale that they can't get rid of.
And I know you make your prediction over 4 to 6 years. Can you give us any idea what you think will happen over the next 12 months to the housing market in the UK?
By the end of next year, I see the national average falling between 5 and 10%.
Jonathan Davis. Well, with me is Ray Bolger, Technical Manager of Mortgage Brokers John Charcoal. Ray, Martin Wheel talked of a house price correction. HSBC Bank has said houses are 30% overvalued. Jonathan Davis there says 40% fall perhaps by 2012. How do you see it?
Well, I'm certainly not that bearish, but I think in the short term one does have to be bearish. I mean, HSBC, having said house prices were 30% overvalued, said they couldn't explain it. Well, I think you can explain it very easily. It's supply and demand. And what we are seeing is an increasing reluctance of lenders now to lend to the high risk categories of borrowers. One thing that has begun to concern me a lot more over the last 2 or 3 weeks is that the liquidity crunch has got worse. We're now 4 months into it, and instead of getting better, it's getting worse, and it doesn't look like it's going to get any better for several months. So I think we are in for a rocky time for the next few months.
Yes, I mean, you mentioned supply and demand, which has always been the thing I've said about this, I must say, but if we're seeing more buy-to-let properties being sold because people are concerned about that market, that increases the supply. You've just said borrowing is getting tighter, so that reduces the demand because it's harder for people to borrow the money. The two together should bring down prices.
And that is currently happening. I think over the next 6 to 9 months we will see prices fall. I'm not as bearish as Jonathan Davis, but I think a 5% fall over the next 6 to 9 months is quite feasible. But then I expect to see a bit of a recovery, because it's hard to see the Bank of England allowing the liquidity crunch to continue into the second half of next year. So when credit conditions ease, we'll see a bit of a recovery.
Well, if the Bank of England can solve the problem, of course, which we don't know at the moment. What about regional differences, though? I mean, Jonathan again mentioned particular places where there were lots of flats coming on the market. Are we going to see more regional differences as prices begin to come down?
Well, there have always been big regional differences. Last year, for example, Northern Ireland saw prices go up over 50%. But the big problem at the moment is certainly some of the major city centre flats, and that problem's caused fundamentally by the government insisting on developers achieving a much higher density in order to get planning permission, and that means there are too many flats on the market, a lot of which have been sold to investors, often off plan.
And how are lenders going to be reacting to this? Are they going to try and persuade us we can afford to borrow and offer complicated deals more than they are now that are hard for people to sort out?
Well, lenders certainly have been offering an increasing variety of deals over the last 2 years, and I think that's really good for borrowers because there's more choice. You can, for example, get a 2-year tracker deal at just under 5%, but you have to pay a fee of 2.5%.
That's hard to work out the pros and cons of that, isn't it?
Well, actually, if it's a percentage-based fee, as long as you're one of the 50% of people who understand percentages, it's quite easy to work out.
Yeah. Okay. Ray, just finally, briefly, where do you think house prices will be a year from now?
I would say in a year's time they'll be 2 to 3% lower than they are now.
Ray Bolger from John Charcoal, thanks very much. And you can have your say on house prices. Some of you already are. Will they fall? Would that be good or bad? On our website, bbc.co.uk/moneybox.